The morning sun had barely peeked through the airport windows as a man in his mid-40s walked through Terminal B of San Francisco International Airport. Dressed in worn-out jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and carrying a slightly scuffed backpack, he looked like any other economy passenger trying to catch an early flight. But appearances can be deceiving. This unassuming man was actually Ray Zhang, the founder and CEO of Pacific Airways, though you'd never guess it from his appearance. His salt and pepper hair was slightly messy, and his comfortable walking shoes had seen better days. He could have easily afforded the most expensive designer clothes, but that wasn't his style. Ray believed in staying connected to reality, and this was exactly why he was at the airport at 6 a.m., preparing to board one of his own flights in economy class. As he made his way to Gate B-23, Ray couldn't help but smile at the massive Pacific Airways billboard overhead, an advertisement showing their newest first-class suites. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the owner of the airline, choosing to sit in seat 34C, right by the bathroom. But this had been his practice for the past 15 years, ever since he started the airline with nothing but a dream and his life savings. "Your boarding pass, sir?" asked the gate agent, failing to recognize her own CEO. Ray handed over his ticket, booked under his less-used middle name to avoid drawing attention. The agent raised an eyebrow at his economy ticket and casual attire, probably wondering why he hadn't at least packed a proper shirt for his business trip to New York. Walking down the jet bridge, Ray remembered his own journey. He'd started as a baggage handler at this very airport 25 years ago. Back then, he'd spend his breaks sketching airplane designs on napkins and dreaming about running his own airline. Everyone had called him crazy. After all, who goes from loading luggage to owning an airline? But Ray had persevered, working double shifts, studying business at night, and saving every penny he could. As he stepped onto the aircraft, the familiar smell of fresh coffee and cleaning supplies brought back memories of his first successful investment pitch. He'd been wearing his only suit, a badly fitting hand-me-down from his older brother, when he convinced a group of investors to take a chance on his vision for a different kind of airline. An airline where every passenger, regardless of their ticket class, would be treated with respect and dignity. Ray settled into his cramped economy seat, knees practically touching the seat in front of him. He pulled out his worn leather notebook, a habit he'd maintained since the early days. These undercover flights were his way of ensuring Pacific Airways never lost sight of what mattered most, the real passenger experience. The plane gradually filled up around him. A young mother struggled past with a crying baby, looking exhausted. An elderly gentleman carefully stored his bag in the overhead compartment. A group of college students chatted excitedly about their upcoming adventure. Ray observed it all, making mental notes about how his staff handled different situations. This wasn't just another CEO playing undercover boss for a day. For Ray, these regular economy flights were an essential part of understanding his own airline. He'd learned more about improving service from sitting in these cramped seats than he ever had in board meetings. Just last month, his experience with a broken reading light led to a company-wide overhaul of their maintenance scheduling system. As the final passengers boarded, Ray noticed something different about the cabin crew. There was a new flight attendant he hadn't seen before, looking somewhat overwhelmed as she rushed through her pre-flight checks. Her name tag was slightly crooked, and her hands trembled slightly as she closed the overhead bins. She was clearly new, probably just finished training, and Ray made a mental note to pay attention to how she handled her duties. Little did he know that this ordinary undercover flight was about to become anything but ordinary, and this nervous new flight attendant would play a crucial role in transforming his airline forever. Lily Chen stood in the airplane galley, trying to steady her shaking hands as she arranged drinks on her service card. This wasn't just another flight. It was her first week as a lead flight attendant, and everything that could go wrong seemed to be going wrong. The flight had already been delayed by 2 hours due to mechanical issues, leaving dozens of irritated passengers in their wake. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, adjusting her perfectly pressed uniform for the 10th time. At 28, she was one of the youngest lead flight attendants at Pacific Airways, and the pressure to prove herself worthy of the promotion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her mother had always told her that opportunities like these didn't come easily to immigrant families like theirs, and she couldn't afford to mess this up. The morning had started badly when her alarm failed to go off, forcing her to skip breakfast and rush to the airport. Then, during pre-flight briefing, she'd accidentally spilled coffee on her original uniform and had to borrow one from the crew room. It was slightly too big, making her feel even more out of place. "Lily, we need you at row 12, called her colleague from the front of the plane. A passenger was complaining about the temperature, another about the Wi-Fi not working, and someone else was demanding to speak to the captain about the delay. She took a deep breath, plastered on her best professional smile, and headed out to deal with the situations. As she made her way through first class, Lily couldn't help but notice how different it was from her childhood dreams of being a flight attendant. She'd imagined glamorous trips to Paris and Rome, not dealing with angry businessmen threatening to write complaint emails or children throwing tantrums in the aisles. The passenger in 12A was red-faced and angry about the cabin temperature. "This is ridiculous. I paid good money for this ticket," he shouted, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Lily apologized and assured him she'd check the temperature controls, all while feeling the judgmental stares of other passengers burning into her back. Back in the galley, she caught a glimpse of herself in the tiny mirror. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes from working extra shifts this month. She was trying to save up for her father's medical bills, picking up every available flight she could. The exhaustion was starting to show, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Remember to prioritize first-class service, her supervisor had reminded her during training. Those passengers pay premium prices and expect premium attention. The words echoed in her head as she prepared for drink service, knowing she'd have to somehow manage both first-class and economy passengers with a smile. A voice crackled over her headset. Another passenger needed assistance in economy. Lily felt her anxiety rising. She was already behind schedule with the drink service, and her performance evaluation was coming up next week. One bad review from a premium passenger could undo all her hard work. As she pushed her cart down the aisle, Lily noticed several passengers typing on their phones. In her exhausted state, every glance at a screen looked like someone writing a complaint about her service. Social media had become a flight attendant's worst nightmare. One viral post about poor service could haunt you forever. The turbulence warning light flashed on, further complicating her tasks. She'd have to somehow serve drinks between the bumpy patches while keeping her balance in these uncomfortable crew shoes that pinched her feet. Her trainer's words rang in her ears. "A good flight attendant makes it look effortless, no matter what's happening." Looking at her watch, Lily realized she was now 15 minutes behind schedule. The economy section passengers were starting to show signs of impatience, but first-class service had to come first. She hadn't even had time to take her required break yet, and her hands were starting to shake from low blood sugar. As she turned back toward first class, she noticed a casually dressed man in economy making notes on his phone. Something about his focused expression made her uneasy. Was he documenting her every mistake? In her stressed and exhausted state, she could feel her usual professional composure starting to crack. Little did she know, her interaction with this particular passenger was about to change everything. The drink service was in full swing when Ray raised his hand, trying to catch Lily's attention as she passed by with her cart. He'd been observing the increasingly chaotic situation in economy class for the past hour. Several passengers hadn't received their drinks yet, while first-class passengers were already on their second round of refreshments. "Excuse me," Ray called out politely. "Could I get some water when you have a moment?" His voice was gentle, understanding the visible stress on the flight attendant's face. Lily glanced at him briefly, then at his economy seat, before mumbling a quick, "I'll be right back," and rushing past with her cart. 20 minutes passed. Ray watched as Lily made 3 more trips to first class, serving drinks and responding to what seemed like increasingly trivial requests from premium passengers. In economy, an elderly woman across the aisle was also trying to get Lily's attention for some water, but to no avail. Ray pulled out his worn leather notebook again, jotting down his observations. This wasn't the service standard he'd envisioned for Pacific Airways when he'd started the company. Every passenger deserved basic courtesy, regardless of their ticket class. As he wrote, he noticed Lily watching him suspiciously from the galley. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, causing the seatbelt sign to flash on. A young boy a few rows ahead started crying after spilling his juice. Ray watched as Lily hurried past again, this time not even acknowledging the calls from economy passengers. Her earlier professional demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety every time she glanced at economy class. Finally, during a calmer moment, Ray tried again. "Miss," he called out softly as Lily passed by, "I don't mean to bother you, but several of us have been waiting for drinks for quite a while now." He kept his tone respectful, understanding the challenges of her job. Lily stopped abruptly, her exhaustion and stress finally bubbling to the surface. "Sir," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "I'm handling first-class service right now. Economy passengers will have to wait their turn." Her eyes darted to his phone, where he was still making notes. "I understand you're busy," Ray replied, "but basic courtesy and water service shouldn't be a matter of ticket class." He began typing this observation into his phone, a habit he developed over years of undercover flights. That was the breaking point. Lily's professional mask cracked completely. "Are you recording all this? Planning to post about poor service on social media?" Her voice was rising, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Do you know how hard this job is?" Ray tried to explain. "Actually, I'm just taking notes because—" But Lily cut him off. "Because you think you know how to run an airline better than we do," she snapped. "Let me guess. You fly once a month and think that makes you an expert." Several passengers had turned to watch the confrontation now, some pulling out their phones to record. Ray remained calm, which seemed to irritate Lily even more. He understood her stress. He'd seen similar situations during his early days in the industry. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. "Oh, you want something to post about?" Lily's hands were shaking as she grabbed a cup of Coca-Cola from her cart. "Here's your drink service." In a moment that would soon become infamous, she pretended to trip, deliberately pouring the entire cup over Ray's lap. The cabin fell silent. Passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "Did that really just happen?" The brown liquid spread across Ray's gray t-shirt and jeans, but he remained surprisingly composed. Lily stood there, a mix of satisfaction and horror dawning on her face as she realized what she'd done. Then came the final twist of the knife, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe next time you'll book first class, if you want better service. Though, looking at your clothes, I doubt you could afford it." What Lily didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this simple act of frustration was about to change not just her career, but the entire airline's future. The man she'd just drenched in soda had started his career serving drinks on planes very similar to this one, and he hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be on either side of the service cart. Time seemed to freeze in the cabin as the dark soda dripped from Ray's clothes. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle hum of the airplane engines. Phones were up everywhere, recording what many passengers probably thought would be the next viral airline incident video. Ray slowly reached for a napkin, his movements deliberate and calm. His mind flashed back to his own days as a flight attendant, remembering the stress, the exhaustion, and yes, even moments when he wanted to snap at difficult passengers. But he'd never imagined being on this side of such an incident, especially not on his own airline. "Could I have your employee number, please?" Ray's voice was surprisingly gentle, almost sympathetic. He didn't raise it, didn't show anger. Instead, he dabbed at his soaked shirt with a small cocktail napkin, which was doing little to help the situation. Lily's moment of satisfaction was rapidly turning to dread. Something about his calm reaction was more unsettling than if he'd started yelling. Her hands were trembling as she reached for her name badge, the reality of what she'd just done starting to sink in. I, she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. The weight of her actions was crashing down around her. She'd just intentionally poured a drink on a passenger. Years of training, her recent promotion, her dream job, all potentially ruined in a moment of anger. That's when Tom Wu, the senior flight attendant, came hurrying down the aisle. He'd worked for Pacific Airways for 15 years and had been one of the first employees Ray had hired. His face went pale as he recognized his boss sitting there, covered in Coca-Cola. Mr. Zhang. Sir, I am so sorry. Tom's voice carried down the cabin. The effect of his words was immediate. Lily's face drained of all color as she realized who she'd just doused with soda. Passengers who had been recording quickly lowered their phones, some looking embarrassed for her. The CEO. Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. You're Ray Zhang. Her legs felt weak, and she had to grab the seat next to her to steady herself. The passenger she'd just mocked for not being able to afford first class was the owner of the entire airline. The memories of her words came flooding back. Looking at your clothes, I doubt you could afford it. Each word now felt like a nail in the coffin of her career. Her dream job, the promotion she'd worked so hard for, the extra shifts she'd taken to help with her father's medical bills, it all seemed to be slipping away. Tom was already rushing to get towels and club soda to help clean up, apologizing profusely. But Ray held up his hand, stopping him. It's okay, Tom. Accidents happen. His emphasis on the word accidents was subtle but clear. He knew this had been no accident. Lily stood frozen, watching as other passengers whispered and pointed. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed to be enjoying her moment of humiliation. She could already imagine the headlines. Flight attendant dumps drink on own CEO. Her mother's words echoed in her head about not wasting opportunities. Miss Chen, Ray said, reading her name tag, could we have a word in the galley? His tone wasn't angry or threatening. If anything, it carried a hint of genuine interest. This somehow made everything worse. His calmness in the face of her behavior only highlighted how poorly she'd handled the situation. As they walked toward the galley, Lily felt every eye in the cabin on her back. Her feet felt like lead, each step taking her closer to what she assumed would be the end of her career. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been so worried about passenger complaints affecting her job, and instead, she'd managed to pour a drink on the one person who could fire her with a single word. What she didn't know was that Ray Zhang had already made a decision about her future with Pacific Airways, and it wasn't at all what she was expecting. In the narrow galley of the Boeing 737, Lily stood with her back against the coffee maker, trying to make herself as small as possible. The smell of spilled soda still clung to the air, a reminder of what she'd done. Ray Zhang stood across from her, his shirt still dripping, yet somehow managing to look completely in control of the situation. How long have you been with Pacific Airways? Ray asked, his voice low enough that passengers couldn't overhear. He was dabbing at his shirt with paper towels that Tom had quickly provided before giving them privacy. 8 months, Lily whispered, then corrected herself. 8 months and 12 days. She'd been counting each day, proud of her quick promotion until about 10 minutes ago. Now those same numbers felt like a countdown to unemployment. And you were recently promoted to lead flight attendant. Ray continued, glancing at her slightly oversized borrowed uniform. Lily nodded, unable to find her voice. Tears were threatening to spill from her eyes, but she fought them back. She'd been raised not to cry in front of authority figures. Do you know why I was taking notes? Ray asked, pulling out his phone and showing her the screen. Lily expected to see angry tweets or a half-written complaint email. Instead, she saw a detailed list of observations about service timing, passenger interactions, and staff workflow challenges. "I fly economy at least twice a month," Ray explained, scrolling through his notes. "Not for fun, but because I believe the only way to truly understand our airline's service is to experience it as most of our passengers do." He paused, looking directly at her. "Tell me, what made today so difficult?" The question caught Lily off guard. She'd expected yelling, immediate dismissal, maybe even threats of legal action. Instead, her CEO was asking about her day while standing in a coffee-stained shirt that she'd ruined. "Everything," she admitted, the words tumbling out. "The delay, my uniform got stained, so I had to borrow this one. We're understaffed today. And the first-class passengers keep." She stopped herself, realizing she was making excuses. "Keep demanding priority service while economy passengers wait." Ray finished her sentence. "Yes, I noticed. Did you know I started as a flight attendant myself? Back then, I worked for one of those airlines where first-class passengers were treated like royalty while everyone else was an afterthought." Lily blinked in surprise. She'd heard rumors that the CEO had worked his way up from the bottom, but like most company legends, she'd assumed they were exaggerated. "That's why I started Pacific Airways," Ray continued, wiping his hands with a paper towel. "I wanted to create an airline where every passenger felt valued, regardless of their ticket class. But somewhere along the way, it seems we've lost sight of that." "I'm so sorry," Lily finally managed to say, her voice cracking. "I understand if you need my resignation." She reached up to unpin her wings, the symbol of her position that she'd been so proud to earn. "Resignation?" Ray looked genuinely surprised. "Why would I want that? Do you know how much it costs to train a new flight attendant? Besides," he added with a slight smile, "you've just given me exactly what I needed." What?" Lily's hand froze halfway to her wings. "You've shown me where our system is breaking down. The pressure we put on our staff to prioritize first class has created exactly the kind of service inequality I wanted to avoid. Your actions today weren't right, but they were a symptom of a bigger problem." He pulled out his worn leather notebook again. "So here's what's going to happen. Instead of firing you, I'm going to need your help. You're going to work with our training department to develop a new service approach. One that maintains our high standards while ensuring every passenger feels respected." Lily stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But I poured soda on you. On purpose." "Yes, you did," Ray agreed, looking down at his stained clothes. "And that was completely unacceptable. You'll face appropriate disciplinary action for that. But firing you would be easy. Teaching our airline how to do better, that's the harder path, and I think you're just the person to help us to it." As Ray's words sank in, Lily realized this moment of crisis might actually be an opportunity. Not just for her, but for every flight attendant who'd ever felt torn between service classes, and for every economy passenger who'd felt overlooked. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Lily returned to her duties with a mix of embarrassment and newfound purpose, while Ray remained in his soda-stained clothes, continuing to make notes as if nothing unusual had happened. The other passengers kept stealing glances at both of them, probably wondering how the story would end. After landing at JFK, Ray asked Lily to meet him in the airline's New York office the next morning. She barely slept that night in the crew hotel, tossing and turning as she replayed the day's events in her mind. She called her mother, finally breaking down as she told her everything that had happened. "Maybe this is your chance to make a real difference," her mother had said, her voice crackling over the phone. "Remember what Dad always says, sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest opportunities." The next morning, Lily arrived at Pacific Airways' regional office an hour early, her hands clutching a cup of coffee like a lifeline. She'd ironed her uniform 3 times, making sure every crease was perfect. The security guard, did a double take when he saw her name on the visitor list for the executive floor. Ray was already there, wearing a fresh suit but still carrying his worn leather notebook. What surprised Lily was the group of people waiting in the conference room. Heads of training, customer service, and cabin crew operations. Everyone, Ray announced as Lily nervously took a seat. Yesterday, we had an incident that opened my eyes to some serious issues in our service model. But rather than treat it as a simple disciplinary matter, we're going to use it as a catalyst for change. For the next 4 hours, they talked. Really talked. Lily found herself sharing everything. The impossible expectations, the stress of balancing different service levels, the way some passengers were treated better than others based solely on their ticket price. To her surprise, the executives listened, really listened, taking notes and asking questions. The truth is, the head of training admitted, we've been so focused on competing with other airlines' luxury services that we've forgotten our original mission. We've created a system that puts impossible pressure on our crew. Ray stood up and walked to the whiteboard. So let's fix it. Right here, right now. He picked up a marker and wrote, "Every passenger matters" at the top. Lily, you'll work with the training team for the next month. Your experience, both good and bad, is exactly what we need to reshape our approach. The disciplinary action turned out to be a 2-week suspension, but with a twist. Lily would spend that time working directly with the training department, helping to develop new service protocols that would become known as the Equal Care Initiative. As she left the office that afternoon, Lily felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. How did it go? She smiled, remembering her mother's words about mistakes and opportunities. The next few weeks were intense. Lily worked alongside training staff, sharing insights from her experiences. They reviewed service procedures, timing, and passenger feedback. She even helped create role-playing scenarios for new flight attendants, including one based on her own mistake, though they did switch the soda to water in the training version. What surprised her most was how her fellow flight attendants responded. Instead of treating her like a cautionary tale, they opened up about their own struggles with the current system. Stories poured in from crew members across the network, each one helping to shape the new approach. The simple act of pouring a drink on her CEO, while still mortifying to think about, had somehow sparked a revolution in airline service standards. As Lily reviewed the draft of the new training manual, she noticed Ray had insisted on including a section about learning from mistakes and the importance of second chances. Sometimes, he'd written in the introduction, it takes a moment of crisis to show us where we need to grow. The measure of our airline isn't in how we serve our most expensive tickets, but in how we treat every single passenger who chooses to fly with us. The story could have ended with a firing and a viral video. Instead, it was becoming something much more meaningful. A lesson about humanity, humility, and the power of turning mistakes into opportunities for change. 1 month after the infamous soda incident, Lily stood at the front of Pacific Airways Training Center, facing a room full of new flight attendants. Her hands weren't shaking anymore when she spoke about customer service. Instead, there was confidence in her voice, the kind that comes from learning from your biggest mistake. Let me tell you about the day I poured a drink on our CEO, she began, watching as the trainees' eyes widened. Some had already heard various versions of the story. It had become something of a legend within the company, but none of them knew she would be their instructor today. I thought I was going to lose everything, she continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. Instead, I learned the most valuable lesson of my career. Today, we're going to talk about what real service means, not just for first class, but for every single person who steps onto our planes. The new Equal Care training program was already showing results. Passenger complaints had dropped by 30% in the first month. More surprisingly, positive feedback had increased across all cabin classes. First-class passengers weren't getting less attention. Instead, everyone was getting better service. During the lunch break, Ray stopped by the training center. He still flew economy regularly, but now other flight attendants recognized him, often trying to upgrade him. He always declined with a smile, saying, "I'm here to experience what our regular passengers experience." "How's it going?" he asked Lily, finding her reviewing notes in the break room. She smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been of him just a month ago. Now they had regular meetings to discuss the program's progress. "Really well," she replied, showing him the latest feedback forms. "The new crew members are getting it. They understand that good service isn't about dividing passengers into categories. It's about treating everyone with respect." They'd made practical changes too. The service timing was restructured so flight attendants weren't forced to choose between first class and economy. Simple things, like ensuring water was available to all passengers during delays, became standard procedure. They even created a new position, Service Flow Coordinator, to help balance the workload on busy flights. "You know," Ray said, looking at the training schedule on the wall, "when I started this airline, this was exactly what I wanted. Not just good service, but fair service. Sometimes it takes seeing things go wrong to figure out how to make them right." Lily thought about how different things could have been. If Ray had been like other CEOs, she would have been fired on the spot. That viral video would have ended her aviation career. Instead, her mistake had sparked positive change throughout the entire airline. Later that afternoon, Lily received an email that made her eyes water. It was from a passenger who had been on that fateful flight. An elderly woman in economy who had waited too long for water. She wrote about flying Pacific Airways again and noticing the difference in service. "I fly to visit my grandchildren every month," the email read. "Usually, I feel invisible in economy class. But this time, your flight attendants made me feel just as important as anyone else on that plane. Whatever changes you've made, they're working." Lily printed that email and pinned it to the training room wall. Next to it, she added a photo of her stained borrowed uniform from that day, a reminder of where this journey had started. New trainees often stood looking at that corner, reading the story that had changed Pacific Airways. The airline industry started to notice. Other carriers sent representatives to study the Equal Care program. Aviation magazines wrote articles about how Pacific Airways had transformed their service culture. But for Lily, the real victory was simpler. It was in the everyday moments, watching flight attendants treat every passenger with genuine care. Sometimes, she told her trainees, you have to spill a drink on the CEO to help build a better airline. The room always laughed at that line, but she meant every word. Her biggest mistake had led to her most important contribution, helping create an airline where every passenger truly mattered. 6 months after the incident, Pacific Airways hosted its annual company meeting. The grand ballroom of a downtown hotel was packed with employees from across the network. Lily sat in the middle rows, surrounded by fellow flight attendants who had become close friends during the implementation of the Equal Care program. Ray took the stage dressed in his usual simple style, no fancy suit, just a clean button-down shirt and dark pants. A giant screen behind him displayed the company's latest passenger satisfaction scores, showing dramatic improvements across all cabin classes. Last year, Ray began, something happened that could have been just another viral airline incident. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Instead, it became the catalyst for the biggest positive change in our company's history. The screen switched to show 2 images side by side, one of Ray in his soda-stained shirt from that day, and another of their newest training manual cover. Lily sank slightly in her seat, still embarrassed, but the flight attendant next to her squeezed her hand supportively. "Our revenue has increased by 15% since implementing the Equal Care initiative," Ray continued. "But more importantly, our employees report feeling happier at work. The pressure to prioritize certain passengers over others has been replaced by a system that allows our crew to provide genuine care to everyone." He shared stories from passengers. A young mother traveling alone with twins who felt supported throughout her flight. an elderly man in economy who received the same attention as premium passengers, a business executive who chose to fly economy because the service was just as good. But numbers and stories only tell part of the tale, Ray said, his voice growing warmer. The real success is in how we've changed as a company. Would Lily Chen please join me on stage? Lily's heart jumped to her throat. This wasn't part of the program she'd seen. Her colleagues gently nudged her forward as she made her way to the stage, trying not to trip over her own feet. 6 months ago, Ray addressed the crowd as Lily stood nervously beside him. This young woman made a mistake that could have ended her career. Instead, she helped us build something remarkable. He turned to face her. Lily, we'd like to announce your promotion to Director of Customer Experience Training. The applause was deafening. Lily stood there, stunned, as Ray handed her a new name badge. Her mother, who had been secretly invited to the event, was crying in the front row. But that's not all. Ray continued once the applause died down. Today, we're launching something new, the Second Chance Initiative. The screen behind them changed to show a new company program. Inspired by Lily's story, we're creating a formal program to help employees turn their mistakes into opportunities for growth. He explained how the initiative would work. Instead of immediate termination for non-safety-related mistakes, employees would have the chance to propose solutions and improvements. The company would provide support and resources to implement viable ideas. Because sometimes, Ray smiled, glancing at his once-stained shirt that was now framed in the training center. Our biggest mistakes show us our best opportunities for improvement. After the ceremony, Lily found herself surrounded by colleagues sharing their own stories of mistakes and lessons learned. A young baggage handler told her about an idea he had for improving luggage handling. A gate agent shared her thoughts on making boarding more efficient. You've opened the door, her mother told her later that evening, her eyes bright with pride. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been afraid to admit their mistakes or suggest changes. That night, as Lily looked out her apartment window at the planes taking off and landing at the distant airport, she thought about how far she'd come from that terrible day. Her mistake hadn't defined her. Instead, it had defined a new way of thinking about service, about leadership, and about giving people second chances. The next morning, she would board another flight. But this time, she wasn't serving drinks or training crews. She was flying to other airlines' headquarters, sharing Pacific Airways' story of transformation. Sometimes the best teacher is someone who's made the biggest mistake, learned from it, and helped others learn too. 1 year to the day after the soda incident, Lily stood in the same airport terminal where it all began, but everything felt different. The morning sun streamed through the windows, just like that fateful day, but now she was here to welcome a special flight. Pacific Airways' first Equal Care Showcase trip for airline industry executives. Representatives from major airlines around the world had come to experience firsthand how Pacific Airways had transformed their service model. They would fly as regular passengers, scattered throughout different cabin classes, to see the Equal Care program in action. Ready for this? Ray asked, appearing beside her in his signature casual style. Today, he wore a clean gray t-shirt, a deliberate choice that made Lily smile, remembering the stained one that now hung framed in the training center. A year ago, I was terrified of you. Lily laughed, adjusting her new director's badge. Now I'm about to help you show the industry how pouring soda on your CEO can lead to positive change. The showcase flight was carefully planned. Some airline executives were seated in first class, others in economy. The crew, trained under the new program, didn't know which passengers were evaluating them. That was the point, to show that excellent service wasn't reserved for special guests. Before boarding, Lily gave a brief presentation in the airport's conference room. A year ago, I made the worst mistake of my career, she began, watching the executives lean forward in their seats. I let stress and an unfair system turn me into someone I didn't want to be. But thanks to a leader who saw an opportunity in crisis, That mistake transformed our entire airline. She shared the numbers. Customer satisfaction up 40%, employee retention improved by 35%, and surprisingly, first-class bookings had actually increased. When you treat everyone with respect, she explained, everyone wants to fly with you, regardless of their ticket class. During the flight, Lily walked through the cabin, watching with pride as her trained crew demonstrated the new service model. Water was offered to all passengers during boarding. Service flowed smoothly between cabins. Every passenger interaction was marked by genuine care. In the middle of the flight, she overheard an executive in economy saying, "I can't tell which passengers paid more for their tickets. Everyone's being treated like a valued guest." That was exactly the point. After landing, the group gathered for a final presentation. Ray took the stage first, but instead of giving a speech, he played a video. It showed interviews with passengers and crew members, all sharing how the airline had changed. A young mother talked about feeling supported during a difficult flight with her toddler. An elderly passenger praised the attentive service and economy. A business executive explained why he now chose Pacific Airways for his company's travel. Then came the crew testimonials. Flight attendants spoke about reduced stress and greater job satisfaction. Ground staff shared stories of empowerment through the Second Chance initiative. Even the baggage handlers had stories of improvement and innovation. A year ago, Ray concluded, "We had a choice. We could have handled a mistake the traditional way, with punishment and dismissal. Instead, we chose to learn from it. Today, Pacific Airways isn't just an airline. We're proof that treating every person with respect, passengers and employees alike, isn't just good service, it's good business." As the executives departed, many already on their phones sharing what they'd learned, Lily found herself back at Gate B23, the same gate where her journey had begun. A new group of passengers was boarding, including a woman struggling with 2 small children. She watched as a flight attendant, one she'd trained herself, immediately went to help, offering the same care she would have given a first-class passenger. No hesitation, no checking the ticket class, just pure human kindness. "Sometimes the best things in life start with a spilled drink," Ray said, appearing beside her again. They both watched the scene at the gate, remembering how different things had been a year ago. "You know what the best part is?" Lily replied, smiling at a memory. "I haven't tripped or spilled a single drink since that day." "Well," Ray laughed, "some lessons you only need to learn once." As they watched the flight take off into the evening sky, Lily realized that success wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about having the courage to learn from them, the wisdom to change because of them, and the heart to help others learn from them too. The story of the flight attendant who poured soda on her CEO would be told for years to come, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to the most beautiful transformations.